everybody, Marcus here. Now I want to remind everybody of our pact that for every 1,000 subscribers I receive on this channel, I will give away one copy of Cyberlink's Power Director 13 Ultra software. So please consider liking this video, sharing it, subscribing, or even just listening to the very end. So here we are, Krieg, the second part of our argument as to the nature of nihilism. In the first video, I gave you Nietzsche's account of what nihilism is and how it can be overcome. In that video, we saw how Nietzsche completely destroys the otherworldly and advocates for the coming of the Overman, the type of man who sets values. In this account, I want to adopt a very different voice and perspective. Though I am a great admirer of Nietzsche's work, it is important to note that there's no such thing as a Nietzschean. The very concept of a Nietzschean is a contradiction when you get a deeper understanding of his works. His book, Thus Spoke Zarathustra, is in part a big chastisement to his readers, and the message is this: don't blindly believe what I am saying to you, and definitely don't follow me. So it is in this spirit that I present the account of this video. I will attempt to rip apart Nietzsche's argument so you, Krieg, and all my listeners can decide for yourselves what makes sense and what does not. But first, we must set the stage. Krieg, would we not live in a fantastic world if everyone were to embody the following statements? I do not support violence or amoral practices. I support the moral and intellectual development of children and the protection of the natural world. Both the arts and sciences are crucial to human development, and thus both are cherished. I feel that people should be focused on this life and how to make the most of it every single day. I want the ability to recognize both good and evil, to accept that all actions have consequences, both positive and negative, and to actively influence my environment. I prefer the concept of a natural life, free from the burdens and expectations of modern civilization. Objectivity, science, and personal exploration and discovery are treasured beyond anything else, and with the ultimate goal being a world of peace, acceptance, and unity. I want to spread knowledge, understanding, and tolerance wherever possible, helping others to realize the potential for greatness within themselves and to achieve as much as they can. I want to attain enlightenment. Yes, these do indeed sound like wonderful statements, and here in the MGTOW community, I would find it hard-pressed to find people who would voice an objection against any of them. But Krieg, perhaps I am being a little too cryptic with all of this, so let me clarify why I am telling you all this. To do so, however, we will need to go back to the story of Adam and Eve from the Bible. I think you know the story pretty well, but I will tell it anyways, just in case any of my listeners are not familiar with it. But perhaps I will use the words of Karl Rakshi to tell this story, as he does in his book, The Interruption of Eternity, Modern Gnosticism and the Origins of the New Religious Consciousness. The story goes something like this. In the Hypostasis of the Archons, an Egyptian Gnostic document, we read how the traditional story of man's disobedience towards God is reinterpreted as a universal conflict between knowledge and the dark powers of the world, which bind the human soul in ignorance. The Hypostasis describes man as a stepchild of Sophia, created according to the model of Ion, the imperishable realm of eternity. On the other hand, it is neither God the imperishable nor Sophia who actually is responsible in the making of man. On the contrary, the task is undertaken by the Archons, the demonic powers who, because of their weakness, entrap man in a material body and thus cut him off from his blessed origin. They place him in paradise and enjoin him against eating of the tree of knowledge. The prohibition, however, is viewed by the author of the text not as a holy command, but as a malignant effort on the part of the inferior spirits to prevent Adam from having true communion with the high God, from gaining authentic gnosis. Well, what exactly is going on in this story? It seems a little bit different from what we are used to. Well, is it not? Well, you see, Krieg, Rakshi tells us that the God of Genesis, who comes to reprimand Adam and Eve after their transgression, is rudely caricatured in this tale as the arrogant Archon, who opposes the will of the authentic Heavenly Father, and the serpent, called the instructor, tells the mortal pair to defy the prohibition of the archons and eat of the tree of knowledge. You see, Krieg, Rakshi says the god of Genesis is an oppressive, arrogant archon, the embodiment of ignorance and religious superstition. And the snake, namely Lucifer, the bringer of light, is the liberator of humanity. All those beautiful statements I read to you before, those are the beliefs of a Luciferian. And this version of the story of the Garden of Eden serves as the basis of all Luciferian mythology. Lucifer, according to Rakshi, makes man aware of his own innate divinity and promises to unlock the God within man. In this story, Luciferianism does not depict the devil as a, literal metaphysical entity. Lucifer only symbolizes the cognitive powers of man. He is the embodiment of science and reason. It is the Luciferians' conviction that these two facilitative forces will dethrone God and apotheosize man, meaning Lucifer elevates man to the status of godhood. Lucifer enlightens man. He is the bringer of light, at least according to Rakshi. What we need to be very careful with at this point is in our use of the word apotheosis. This word, as used as part of the Luciferian account, means that man is brought to equality with God, not that man is brought into communion with God. You see, the Orthodox Christian teaching sees apotheosis as becoming one with God and promotes this as, its highest goal. I mean, this is a goal that you would see monastic monks pursuing as an extreme example. No, the Luciferian does not see himself becoming one with God. He seeks to elevate man to be equal to God and outside of God. But let us continue with the argument, keeping in mind how apotheosis is meant to be understood in the Luciferian sense. Now, Krieg, I want to read to you a paragraph from the Stanford Encyclopedia of Philosophy about the period in history known as the Enlightenment. Quote, "The Enlightenment is the period in the history of Western thought and culture stretching roughly from the mid-decades of the 17th century through the 18th century, characterized by the dramatic revolutions in science, philosophy, society, and politics. These revolutions swept away the medieval worldview and ushered in our modern Western world. Enlightenment thought culminates historically in the political upheaval of the French Revolution, in which the traditional hierarchical political and social orders, meaning the French monarchy, the privileges of the French nobility, the political power and authority of the Catholic Church, were violently destroyed and replaced by a political and social order informed by the enlightenment of ideals of freedom and equality for all, founded ostensibly upon principles of human reason. Only late in the development of the German Enlightenment, when the Enlightenment was near its end, does the movement become self-reflective. The question of what is enlightenment is asked. Immanuel Kant expresses many of the tendencies shared among Enlightenment philosophies of divergent doctrines. Kant defines enlightenment as humankind's release from its self-incurred immaturity. Immaturity is the inability to use one's own understanding without the guidance of another. Enlightenment is the process of undertaking to think for oneself, to employ and rely on one's own intellectual capacities in determining what to believe and how to act. Enlightenment philosophers from across the geographical and temporal spectrum tend to have a great deal of confidence in humanity's intellectual powers, both to achieve systematic knowledge of nature and to serve as an authoritative guide to practical life." End quote. Well, Krieg, the Enlightenment, Lucifer, the bringer of light, confidence in humanity's intellectual powers, both to achieve systematic knowledge of nature and to serve as an authoritative guide in practical life. You see, Krieg, before the Enlightenment, God was the authoritative guide in practical life, and with the onset of science, man had all but vanquished God. The coup de grace came from Charles Darwin and the theory of evolution. When taken at the symbolic level, the Enlightenment was the attitudinal change in man through eating from the tree of knowledge for a second time. Philip D. Collins writes in an article, quote, "It comes as little surprise that the radicals of the early revolutionary faith celebrated the arrival of Darwinism, Evolutionary theory was the edifying science of Promethean zealotry and the new secular religion of the scientific dictatorship. According to the scholar Wilmshurst, the completion of human evolution involves man becoming a godlike being and unifying his consciousness with the omniscient. During the Enlightenment, Luciferianism was disseminated on the popular level as secular humanism. All of the governing precepts of Luciferianism are encompassed by secular humanism. This is made evident by the philosophy's rejection of theistic morality and enthronement of man as his own absolute moral authority. While Luciferianism has no sacred texts, Humanist Manifesto 1 and 2 succinctly delineate its central tenets. Whittaker Chambers, former member of the Communist Underground in America, eloquently summarizes this truth. Humanism is not new. It is, in fact, man's second oldest faith. Its promise was whispered in the first days of creation under the tree of knowledge of good and evil. Ye shall be as gods. End quote. Well then, I have heard more than one person call themselves a humanist in recent times. I mean, the Wikipedia entry for humanism reads, quote, "Humanism is a philosophical and ethical stance that emphasizes the value and agency of human beings individually and collectively, and generally prefers critical thinking and evidence, rationalism, empiricism, over established doctrines of faith." End quote. It seems like our story is getting more and more interesting. But Craig, have we not within the MGTOW community often accused women of egotism, narcissism, even solipsism? Have we not been noticing the ever-increasing trend of these phenomenon in social justice warriors, in feminists, in consumer culture, in the me attitude, in cam whoring, selfie culture, special snowflakes, divas, in social media friend hoarding, Twitter follower gathering, the perpetual war for attention everywhere you turn? But what is the metaphysical thesis of solipsism? Well, perhaps the strongest and most controversial feature of the solipsistic mind is the denial of the existence of other minds. But if someone denies the existence of other minds, then they themselves are the only mind that exists. This means a solipsistic individual sees themselves as God. This is how Rakshi and others who put forward this argument bring the problem of nihilism back into traditional metaphysics. But Krieg, it gets even better. You ever heard of transhumanism? Well, it can be seen as the high-tech version of Luciferianism. It is the augmentation of the human condition through technology. According to Wikipedia, transhumanism was coined by evolutionary biologist Julian Huxley. So Huxley defined the transhuman condition as man remaining man, but transcending himself by realizing new possibilities of and for his human nature. However, by 1990, Dr. Max Moore would radically redefine transhumanism as follows. Transhumanism is a class of philosophies that seek to guide us towards a post-human condition. Transhumanism shares many elements of humanism, including a respect for reason and science, a commitment to progress, and a value of human or transhuman existence in this life. Transhumanism differs from humanism in recognizing and anticipating the radical alterations in the nature and possibilities of our lives resulting from various sciences and technologies. So, Philip D. Collins writes, and this is going to be a really long quote from Collins, so while I read it, listen for when I say end quote to become aware when Collins' thoughts end. Quote, "Transhumanism advocates the use of nanotechnology, biotechnology, cognitive science, and information technology to propel humanity into a post-human condition. Once he has arrived at this condition, man will cease to be man. He will become a machine, immune to death and all the other weaknesses intrinsic to his former human condition. The ultimate objective is to become a god. Transhumanism is closely aligned with artificial intelligence. In the very influential book, The Age of Spiritual Machines, Al Ray Kurzweil asserts that technological immortality could be achieved through magnetic resonance imaging or some technique of reading and replicating the human brain's neural structure within a computer. Through the merger of computers and humans, Kurzweil believes that man will become godlike spirits inhabiting cyberspace as well as the material universe. Following the biblical revisionist tradition of the Gnostic hypostasis myth, transhumanists invert the roles of God and Satan. In an essay entitled In Praise of the Devil, transhumanist ideologue Max Moore depicts Lucifer as a heroic rebel against a tyrannical God. The devil, Lucifer, is a force for good. Lucifer means light bringer, and this should begin to clue us in to his symbolic importance. The story is that God threw Lucifer out of heaven because Lucifer had started to question God and was spreading dissension amongst the angels. We must remember that this story is told from the point of view of the goddess, and not from that of the Luciferian. The truth may just as easily be that Lucifer resigned from heaven. According to Moore, Lucifer probably exiled himself out of moral outrage towards the oppressive Jehovah. God, being the well-documented sadist that he is, no doubt wanted to keep Lucifer around so that he could punish him and try to get him back under his power. Probably what really happened was that Lucifer came to hate God's kingdom, his sadism, his demand for slavish conformity and obedience, his psychotic rage at any display of independent thinking and behavior. Lucifer realized that he could never fully think for himself and could certainly not act on his independent thinking so long as he was under God's control. Therefore, he left heaven. That terrible spiritual state ruled by the cosmic sadist Jehovah and was accompanied by some of the angels who had enough courage to question God's authority and his value perspective. Well, just to interject here for a moment, this account of the fall of Lucifer is still Collins speaking. The quote continues. Moore proceeds to reiterate Albert Pike's depiction of Lucifer. Lucifer is the embodiment of reason, of intelligence, of critical thought. He stands against the dogma of God and all other dogmas. He stands for the exploration of new ideas and new perspectives in the pursuit of truth. Lucifer is even considered a patron saint by some transhumanists. Transhumanism retains the paradigmatic character of Luciferianism, albeit in a futuristic context. Worse still, transhumanism is hardly some marginal cult. Richard Hayes, executive director of the Center for Genetics and Society, elaborates. Last June, at Yale University, the World Transhumanist Association held its first national conference. The transhumanists have chapters in more than 20 countries and advocate the breeding of genetically enriched forms of post-human beings. Other advocates of the new techno-eugenics, such as Princeton University professor Lee Silver, predicted that by the end of this century, all aspects of the economy, the media, the entertainment industry, and the knowledge industry will be controlled by members of the genetically rich class. Naturals will work as low-paid service providers or as laborers. With a growing body of academic luminaries and a techno-eugenical vision for the future, transhumanism is carrying the banner of Luciferianism into the 21st century. Through genetic engineering and biotechnological augmentation of the physical body, transhumanists are attempting to achieve the very same objective of their patron saint. Whatever form the Luciferianism assumed throughout the years, its goal remains the same: apotheosis. End quote. And apotheosis, as we said before, should be understood as placing man as an equal to God, and not the Orthodox Christian notion of man coming into communion with God. Now, there was a crap load going on in this story, and some of it is controversial in ways not relevant to the argument. What we need to keep in mind at this time, however, is that all of this talk of Lucifer and his fall from heaven, it's all symbolic. Though there is a group of Luciferians who do believe in the actual existence of such a being, we're not concerned with them. What we are concerned with is the atheistic Luciferian account. Lucifer only symbolizes that human capacity to vanquish the belief in the otherworldly. So this starts to paint Nietzsche's account as being completely Luciferian in nature. See, Nietzsche argued that nihilism is the descent into an animalistic state of a man who could not handle the idea that God, truth, meaning, and all otherworldly things do not exist. Nietzsche's major philosophical project was the destruction of the otherworldly, so that all value would be seen as coming from man and man alone, from this world. This is the exact same message and task of the Luciferian mythology. So you see, Creek, when we go back and read Nietzsche's words, What is great in man is that he is a bridge and not a goal. We can interpret them quite differently. We can look upon his account as an account of nihilism as coming from a Luciferian perspective. The last man now becomes he who does not strive for godhood, but has also been deprived of the leap of faith. But if Nietzsche's account of nihilism is that as coming from a Luciferian perspective, then what is nihilism from a non-Luciferian perspective? Well, Krieg, nihilism from a non-Luciferian perspective is Luciferianism itself. It is the destruction of objective morality and the rise of the ego, the rise of solipsism. It is the battle between the existence of a higher mind versus human ego. For objective morality entails God, and with the rejection of God, we are only left with a morality that was created by man. Morality itself is demoted to the opinion of someone, and like all opinion, everyone's got one. So in this way, we will have as many moralities as we have people. This approach to morality means that that which is deemed good will originate from those who can scream and repeat their opinion loudest. This means that those with the power or wealth or celebrity are now the people who control what is good and what is evil, because there's nothing objective that their vision of morality can be scrutinized against. Killing will remain a bad thing for only as long as most people agree it is wrong. And if someone with the means and wish to change public opinion wants to make killing a good thing, they are able to do so. The thesis of social construction starts to be applied everywhere. With the perpetual growth in the number of people who come to believe themselves to be gods, so too does nihilism spread. I mean, these people do not believe this overtly, though. I mean, no, it's just silly. They only believe this in secret, as a deeply concealed conclusion that has never risen to their conscious mind. A conclusion that does not need to rise into their conscious mind for them to behave according to it. They believe this through those beautiful statements I read out before. I do not support violence or immoral practices. I support the moral and intellectual development of children and the protection of the natural world. Both the arts and sciences are crucial to human development, and thus both are cherished. I feel that people should be focused on this life and how to make the most of it every single day. I want the ability to recognize both good and evil, to accept that all actions have consequences, both positive and negative, and to actively influence my environment. I prefer the concept of a natural life, free from the burdens and expectations of modern civilization. Objectivity, science, and personal exploration and discovery are treasured beyond anything else, and with the ultimate goal being a world of peace, acceptance, and unity. I want to spread knowledge, understanding, and tolerance wherever possible, helping others to realize the potential for greatness within themselves and to achieve as much as they can. I want to attain enlightenment. The Luciferian project of bringing man to equality with God is not more than the conclusion of the inner logic that stems from the Enlightenment project. It is the consequence of all these other beliefs, such as, the self-sustaining ego and the creation of paradise on earth. But, like the saying goes, the road to hell is paved with good intentions. So too does the reality of the Luciferian project end in nihilism. So, what can be done to overcome nihilism? Well, under this account, we need to go back and take a second look at traditional metaphysics. Where we seem to have discarded one God as considered the backward belief system of those who preceded us, we seem to be on the road to gaining 7 billion gods as a result. What about MGTOW? The accusation has been leveled at us that we're nihilistic. Well, if nihilism is in fact Luciferianism, then we are guilty of spreading some nihilistic ideas. I mean, there are videos put out there by MGTOW content producers in praise of transhumanist endeavors. There's an ever-growing number of men who are placing the self above all else. The very notion of male sovereignty is the pinnacle of Luciferian ideas. You see, Krieg, the only being to which we can attribute absolute sovereignty to is God. So if MGTOW is the striving for sovereignty, it is in fact striving for godhood. Therefore, Luciferianism. Though I do understand the lay use of the word is not really intentionally loaded with that connotation, the spirit of that connotation is there nonetheless. You see, we don't need to be fully conscious of what we are saying to in fact be expressing a pretty substantial message. It's only after rigorous evaluation of the concepts that we throw around do we see the consequences of what we're actually saying. This is why this channel exists, to dive into the metaphysics of MGTOW. And as I see it, there's a very clear and apparent undercurrent of Luciferianism within this group. Sandman has even explicitly stated in one of his videos that religious men cannot be MGTOW, that the rules that come with religious belief are just simply too constraining to be able to go your own way. You know, I often talk about virtue ethics, but I don't speak of God. Because, well, let's face it, any mention of God is met with scorn for the most part. But the underlying justification for arete, virtue, well, in the opinion of some philosophers, is theistic. The virtues are argued as moral virtues. It's not some sky god living in the clouds, talking through burning bushes or anything, or any other mythology like that. But it touches on the idea of the soul, nous, and the good. The argument goes that there are very abstract metaphysical entities that in Christianity turned into the Father, the Son, and the Holy Spirit. Christianity has been referred to as Platonism for the masses. It can be seen as a mythologized account of incredibly abstract ideas that long preceded Christianity. It can be viewed as anthropomorphized stories meant to communicate the abstract concepts in a way that people can understand them. Christianity took those things from the works of Plato that fit the orthodox belief of Christianity and left out those bits that did not work. But to even accuse the religious texts like the Bible of being an anthropomorphized story is to express a very modern idea as what the texts actually are. It is said that these books are filled with symbols and contradictions and absurdities planted as traps for lazy readers, planted there for those who have no business reading such books. This is the exact same thing that Nietzsche did in his writings, and he says so explicitly in Ecce Homo. The phenomenon of a lazy mind taking an idea and grossly twisting it due to a shallow understanding is what results in ridiculous ideas like microaggressions or rape culture and any number of absurdities that come from someone who can't be bothered to understand or is incapable of understanding. The witch hunts, the crusades, suicide bombers. These are all phenomena that can be said only come from minds who should have never been exposed to the ideas that inevitably paved a way to such conclusions. It is no different than giving a child a gun and being surprised they do something stupid, then blaming the gun. Those that would use religion as a justification for whatever agenda they wish to peddle are people with moral failings that are not brought about by religion, no more so than the desire to murder is brought about by the existence of guns and knives. No, religion is only their chosen vehicle to achieve such justification. Their agenda could have just as easily found its justification in some ideology or from scientific research. Blind faith in and outright rejection of God are two sides of the same coin. They both demand personal ignorance on the subject as well as a very deeply rooted presupposition, that of assuming you know the truth of the matter. Fideism, the idea that faith is antagonistic to reason and therefore the two should not be mixed, is anti-intellectualism in the same way as the naturalism that is rampant amongst the science community. Fideism asserts that you simply must believe in God for no reason, while naturalism demands you must not believe in God for no reason. Each simply presuppose the existence or non-existence of God as their starting point. But what justifies someone in making a claim as substantial as that of possessing knowledge? Not even Socrates dared make that claim. The skeptical approach is the only intellectually honest position to start with. One must suspend judgment until such a time as you are justified to change your position. Then, only at the very end of a long argument, an argument that one does not simply fall into through absorbing sound bites, will you ever find yourself in a position to decide if in fact you truly know, or for that matter can know, the answer. This was the view of the ancient skeptics, the Pyrrhonists. The Pyrrhonists believed very different things from those who you would encounter in the skeptics community. I mean, let me pose to you an argument on the uncertainty of human knowledge. It goes something like this. If you see an apple sitting on a table, we can say that the sense datum of that apple enters your mind and you experience a cataleptic impression of that apple. This impression is the only thing you have access to, and for all intents and purposes is your only way of experiencing the apple on the table. Now, what if you had a hallucination of the apple in which your mind created an acataleptic impression identical to the one that was created when you saw the apple on the table? How would you be able to tell the difference between the cataleptic impression created by sense datum of the apple and the impression created through a hallucination? You would not be able to tell the difference. As such, what justifies you in believing that there actually is an apple, as opposed to you having a hallucination of an apple? What justifies you in claiming to possess the knowledge that that apple is really there? You know, it is these sorts of questions, when left unanswered, make a fool of anyone claiming knowledge of the existence or lack of existence in God. Because if you go down the road of seeing as believing, then with the Pyrrhonist argument I just explained, I have undermined your justification in your belief that apples exist as you perceive them. Nietzsche's argument discussing nihilism talks about the otherworldly setting a standard that is unachievable by man. You know, this results in man feeling betrayed, and therefore man rejects the otherworldly thesis as a whole. This perceived non-achievability leads Nietzsche into rejecting the otherworldly so as to solve the problem. But the Luciferian thesis, which results from this rejection, does not actually solve this problem. You see, when you reject the otherworldly, you reject the existence of entities such as God. I mean, you claim that these entities simply do not exist. So, how can the Luciferian promise of elevating man into godhood then be possible? Well, it is not. It's a contradiction. So in this way, any attempt at man to elevate themselves to godhood presupposes that such beings exist. So either Luciferianism can deliver on its promise and God exists, or so too, Luciferianism will betray us in the same way that Nietzsche sees the otherworldly has betrayed us. So Nietzsche's solution to overcoming nihilism won't work. It will betray you in the same way he claimed the otherworldly betrayed you. This leaves his account of nihilism without a solution. You know, a very dreary prospect. But nihilism surely has a solution, as its rise in recent years surely means there was less of it before. So, if this is the case, and more people are adopting Nietzsche's worldview and abandoning the otherworldly, then we can conclude that his solution is in fact the problem itself. As Nietzsche's solution is Luciferianism, this means that nihilism is Luciferianism. Also, the transhumanists that wish to present a picture in which they believe they are capable of ascending man to the status of godhood are clearly mistaken, as their core belief system denies that sort of being. At best, they can hope to stave off death, but in doing so they will in essence destroy humanity if successful. I mean, what sort of being may result from their work no one knows, but it will not be human. So even though we can see in MGTOW, a Luciferian undercurrent, we do not see Luciferianism as a necessary groundwork for MGTOW to make philosophical sense. I mean, what we do see, however, are nihilistic ideas like transhumanism notions, or a phrasing advocating sovereignty, in any way other than the loosest meaning of the word. So Craig, if you wish to escape a nihilistic disposition under this account, you need to deeply consider what justifications your belief system stands on. This is a challenging task as it'll involve a lot of introspection. If you agree with the Luciferian thesis, then start by suspending judgment about the potential existence of a first principle, and don't shy away from philosophical works either. Aristotle's Nicomachean Ethics is, not the worst place to start reading, and there are tons of YouTube videos that can help you understand that work. If, however, the thesis that Nietzsche puts forward makes more sense to you, then follow his advice and make yourself into a value. Well, Craig, I hope that, in some small way our journey into nihilism and back out has been helpful, and I wish you all the best. But to end on a personal note, though, I try to keep my own beliefs out of my arguments because, much like Heidegger believed, philosophy should be done atheistically as a rule. The reason for this is because it is far too easy to reach to God as a deus ex machina in trying to save an argument. However, on the flip side, if the argument leads to the necessity of the existence of a higher intelligence, of a first principle, this too should not merely be ignored or taken as some sign that the argument failed. Like I said to you all when offering to help dissect existential issues, sometimes it only takes a few sentences to completely transform your worldview, and life is long enough for you to encounter those sentences a few times. As such, I see it as burdensome to develop loyalty to one belief or another, but prefer simply to let the argument carry me wherever it may go. Thanks for listening. Go team.